we can have questions in English.
So the first question, Luang, could you please share some reflections on mana, conceit? Mana, conceit.
Well, when it's fetter, and it's not, Sakya Ditti is the first fetter. The 10 fetters, 10 sangyojanas. Sangyojana is the Pali word for fetter, or fetter is the English word for sangyojana. And Sakya Ditti is the coarse sense of self, with the me and mine, and I'm this human body, and the things we take for granted. But throughout, there's this lingering conceit, a sense of what they call mana, of the subjective, quite it's not, doesn't manifest like Sakya Ditti, but it's an attitude, a kind of lingering attitude that's based on avijja, on ignorance of the Four Noble Truths. So, just like this morning's talk about the first 3 fetters, the third one, doubt, and if you investigate the thinking process in the and the experience of doubt or vicikicca, it's always attachment to views and opinions, to the thinking process, to the view of Sakya Ditti. And if you begin to investigate more thoroughly your own thinking process, and then you begin to see, you're not thinking about thinking or judging thinking, you're noticing thinking is like this. You can only think one word at a time. You can't think 2 words at the same moment. You can't think A and B at the same moment. You have to think A first and B second, because these are sankharas. They arise one at a time. But you can be aware with sati sampajanya of A and B together and the space around them. And you're noticing before you think A, there's consciousness, there's awareness, but no thought. It's like a gap, like space, and then you think A, and then there's a gap, and then you think B. Just noticing how the thinking process operates, and the space between thoughts, and beginning to inform yourself about the space and consciousness, these 2 elements, which are oftentimes ignored these days. Everybody's talking about the impermanence of sankharas, but there's earth, fire, water, and air, the 4 elements, and the 4 dhatu, and then the 2, space and consciousness, have no form. They're immeasurables. There's space, consciousness, nothingness, neither perception or non-perception. These have no forms, but they're, in consciousness itself, it has no form, but so you can't find it. With space, you contemplate space through eye consciousness. Just by noticing the space in the room. And you say this room has a lot of space, or actually the the temple is in space. I mean, space isn't bounded by the walls of this temple. There's space between individuals, and we begin to notice this. We look at the people. We think, I know this person. This is a man, a woman, Thai, Vietnamese, Sinhalese, and we look at all the things. We have all these different perceptions of knowing or not knowing, liking or disliking. But when we look at the space between people, it's there, you can see it. But who bothers to notice it or appreciate it? Because so much of our life is spent just being caught up with the things in space, with the individuals in the room, or the shrine, or the pictures on the wall, rather than noticing space. But space is the most important in this temple right now. Space is the most important quality. Because if there wasn't any space here, we couldn't be here. And yet the least noticed and recognized. And so the Buddha is awakening us to the way things are, how things relate, how shape and form and consciousness work. And this is done through satipanya, or mindfulness and wisdom, by examination. So mana is a kind of lingering sense of self but in my own experience, one became very much aware through investigating doubt, vicikiccha, the limitation of thinking, and suddenly you reach where you're not thinking, but there's still consciousness. Awareness, but the thinking process stops, and then and then doubt itself, like the questions, these conundrums or koans in Zen Buddhism. What is the sound of the clap of one hand? And then you try to figure that one out with your thinking mind. It's absurd. And you can't, is it a thumb snap and then the Zen master hits you with a stick? No, that's not it. But when you ask yourself a question, there's this space, this gap, where there's consciousness but there's no thought for a moment there until we start looking for an answer. But if we're not really interested in the question, then we begin to we're more interested in asking the question and the consciousness that isn't filled with an immediate thought or view or opinion or answer to the question. To be a person, you have to think and believe in what you're thinking. So in the fetters, the last one, the last fetter is avijja, ignorance. But we're using avijja all the time, like with the examination of paticca samuppada, or dependent origination. That kind of meditation on that is where, you start out. It starts out avijja, bhajya, sankhara, sankhara, bhajya, vijnana, vijnana, bhajya, namarupa. So it starts out, the whole suffering comes from avijja. And avijja is the Pali word for ignorance of the Four Noble Truths. And so if we come from the self-view, or the from avijja, then the result's always going to be grief, sorrow, despair, and anguish. disappointment, despair, because that's the way it is. And these points on paticca samuppada are ways of looking at the same moment. You know, what is birth? What is jati and bhava, jati, jara, marana, and so forth. What is that in terms of the reality of this moment? Rather, sometimes they translate paticca samuppada as a three-life theory, but it doesn't really, it has no practical value as a meditation if it's three lives. It's about the present moment. Because this is, when the Buddha was answering the questions, the unanswerable questions, he'd always point to paticca samuppada, rather than give an answer, say, is the Dhamma oneness, or you're always looking for a description or a word or concept, perception of some sort of the ultimate reality is this, and he avoided that, endlessly avoided getting stuck with descriptions of ultimate reality. And he'd always, when asked the question, is the Dhamma two or one, or what, he'd always say, point to the paticca samuppada as the answer. Because the anuloma, batiloma, the one with starting with the vicca, bhajya, sankhara, that will always end up with grief, sorrow, despair, and anguish. Because that's avijja can only produce suffering. But then the insight, the other side, the nirodha side of paticca samuppada is when there's mindfulness, when there's wisdom, then the suffering ceases, and you can test this out in your own meditation. I mean, it's not theoretical. It's not about it's not a kind of Genesis explanation. It's about the here and now moment. And so these kind of teachings are, they're tools to be used. They're precision instruments that are made available to us. And then after insight, like when there's knowledge into the path, the stream entry, maybe it's just a flash. Maybe you see it and you have the insight, but then the habit tendencies come back, and the rest is sakada, kami, anakami, arahant, is the stages where the lessening of where our continuity, a continuous awareness and wisdom operates, rather than just moments of insight and understanding, and then we fall back into the old patterns. But after you have seen the path clearly, then there's a knowing. That's like you entered the stream. So no matter how many times you get deluded by your vipaka karma, you know how to get out of it. You know how to let go of the conditions that you're attached to. And so this is like the lessening of the raga, bhatiga, lustful energies, or anger, that come from, not from sakyaditi anymore, but are part of the mammalian species. It's natural kind of energies that we're now seeing in terms of sankharas rather than in terms of cultural judgments, religious moral attitudes where we're no longer seeing it in terms of good and bad, but recognizing that it is what it is. For the Sangha, we're celibate, so we don't, our life is about refraining from acting on, say, lustful energies. It doesn't mean we don't have these energies, but our relationship to them changes from personalizing them and seeing them in terms of kind of moral judgments that we might get from our culture or religious attitude. We're seeing them in terms of sankhara, so that the deluding qualities of sexual desire are no longer kind of deluding us. We begin to see through that powerful energy, as well as like anger, aversion. In the exploration of doubt, the third fetter, then I began to see quickly that the thinking mind stops. And you can't, once it stops, there's nothing, you're still conscious. And in Thai they call this Luang, empty consciousness. And it's knowable, it's not an annihilation thing, but it's certainly you know this yourself. It's not just a theory that you read about in a book. But the last two fetters, mana and uttacca, I think, and avijja is the last one. They're subtle, lingering states of maybe subtle assumptions where the Arahant is completely free from clinging of any sort on obviously any coarse level, but also in subtle attitudes, because so much of our world is assumed through cultural conditioning. That's why there's all these wars going on and terrorism, because people are thoroughly convinced they're right, being right, and who doesn't agree with me is wrong. It's kind of absolute positions that determine how we act. So to kill off the wrong ones, the enemy, is righteous. It seems right to do. And from that dualistic way of looking at life. But notice in Buddha Dhamma, right and wrong are not absolutes. They're relative. They're conditioned phenomena. And so right isn't some absolute position or viewpoint, but it is relative. And we can be right but not right at the same moment. Like righteous indignation is a problem with most religions, because we should all love each other. We should all get along with each other and not have wars. That's right, but that's not the way it is. Do you see what I mean? When we attach to being right, then we're not aware of the way things are. So we can commit vicious acts like bombings and witch hunting, burning witches at the stake, and the whole history of righteous actions done in the name of righteousness and truth, and yet they're violent actions in themselves, like burning witches or killing the enemy. And yet, in terms of right and wrong, from a moral aspect, if morality becomes absolute, where in Buddhism, morality are precepts, they're not commandments. They're guidelines for behavior, to do good, refrain from doing evil, and to purify the mind is the advice of the Buddha. And this is where, the Buddhism offers this other perspective. It's not fixed in righteous positions. Its aim is to awaken people, not to condition them into belief systems or righteous attitudes. But in the Nirodha side of Paticca Samuppada, I spent 2 years just using Paticca Samuppada, the dependent origination, as a meditation. And then there wasn't very much in English. Buddhadasa, Ajahn Buddhadasa, they translated his version of Paticca Samuppada into English, but it wasn't very good English. But it was all that was available at the time. And I found that, just the way Buddhadasa's reflective style I really liked, and I could relate to it. And so I spent 2 years at Amaravati, one winter's retreat, a 3-month retreat during the winter time. I led the Sangha through meditating on Paticca Samuppada. And first some of them were really hostile about it. Because you're kind of imposing your own reflections. When you're the head monk, you can do this. But at the end, they all said it was quite a wonderful experience, because this looks very complicated, but the dependent origination, and then we're sometimes, because it looks complicated, we kind of avoid it. But I found lately, like Tenjo Kun Payuto, in one of the Thai scholars, very good monk in Bangkok. His book Buddha Dhamma is in Thai, and it's being translated into English. And his reflections and teachings about Paticca Samuppada are really good, and they have been translated into English. And this is a way to explore, investigate your own conscious experience in a way that our cultural societies, our modern education doesn't do. Modern psychology doesn't touch this aspect at all. And yet, this has been available for 2,500 and more years. And it's not some archaic Asian teaching. The Buddha got it right back then. And then he developed this way of teaching. When I've talked about the first sermon at Sarnath, this was a teaching that could be applied. It's not about personality or cultural biases. It's about the human condition of suffering, which we all experience, and then everything follows from that.
There's a question, if you could give some advice on how to use the 4 Brahma Viharas in daily life, please.
Well, like metta is, the 4 Brahma Viharas, metta, karuna, mudita upekkha, or they're called, oftentimes translated as the divine abodes. Brahma vihara means abiding in purity. So they come from the pure consciousness, like when we let go of greed, hatred, and delusion, then like Luang Por, for example, he'd already let go of greed, hatred, and delusion, and so his way of relating to me or to the Sangha or to the lay community around him was through the Brahma Viharas. So these kind of flowed naturally. It wasn't like he was practicing them in any intentional way, but they arise from pure consciousness, and this is why you kind of feel this foundation of metta is. For example, when we just look at metta in terms of the formula we have, then it becomes, it kind of inspires the mind. Thinking positively, thinking about may all beings be happy and free, and spreading goodwill throughout the universe, this is skillful use of thinking. But ultimately, we're faced with, when we're in bad moods, when we feel anger and resentment and hatred, what do? So we can feel guilty then that we should have metta for this person that's offended me. On an ideal level, we should have metta. We should forgive. We should not carry this around. These are all true but not right, right but not true kind of attitudes. Because when we attach to metta as an ideal, this is what happens. It's not an ideal. It's applying metta to whatever arises in us means accepting it. So, like in metta practice, it's not just to people we like and love and agree with, or that. It's to the evil forces in the universe. How can you have metta for the devil or the evil forces? And if metta, nobody's going to like the devil or wish him well. But metta is accepting things from what they are, like evil. There's no kind of permanent devil that but we all have dark shadows and anger and fears and jealousies and resentments that rise up. And mindfulness allows, and metta combined together. Metta is like learning to accept what you're feeling without judgment. It is what it is. So what I've been talking about is really foundation of metta is non-aversion. It's even accepting that, like in the scriptures, when the Buddha was enlightened, then Mara would come and tempt him, and try to delude him. And all the Buddha did was he didn't cut off Mara's head or punch him in the nose. He just said, "I know you, Mara." It's a knowing, and it wasn't from, "I know you, you dirty rat." It's "I know you, Mara. I know what you are." So that's metta, isn't it? It's metta. It's not throwing the devil out, but it's recognizing. That's mindfulness and wisdom operating through the Brahma Viharas. And the upekkha is the natural state of empty mind, of empty consciousness. It's equanimous. It's peaceful. they're like the Jit Luang, or the empty consciousness is equanimous. It's not, you're not, when you're resting and abiding in equanimity, you're not going up and down on emotional levels. And then how does an enlightened person relate to the sadness, the problems of the society? And that's through karuna, through compassion. The natural comes from the purity of consciousness. And then mudita is joy at the beauty of others or of nature. You feel a sense of rising of joy in the goodness and beauty and in other people, in the world around one, is mudita. It's a natural arising of joy in relationship to to that which is truly beautiful and worthy. Then we feel this mudita. But towards everything else is metta, which leads to upekkha. So in the 10 paramitas in the Pali Canon, the last two paramitas are metta and upekkha. And I used to say, why isn't karuna mudita parami? Because this is the expression coming from the purity of an enlightened being. And or it's from your own goodness when you feel, when you experience the sadness of life, when you hear about tragedies or you experience them, then there's always a pathos, a sadness to human existence, to life itself. It's a certain kind of sadness that's natural to it, because in the monastic life we have this reflection: all that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me. And when I first heard this, I thought, this is really depressing, Because, my personality liked the illusion that there were some things you could keep, and or maybe it wasn't that conscious, but when it puts it in there, it's kind of very direct teaching. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me. Then it isn't what my personality wanted to hear, but it is a reflective teaching. It's not depressing if you don't cling to it, but it's true. Inevitably, death takes away everything. And so this pathos that we're all moving to die, we're all going to die, there's this kind of sadness to life. And with, like in forms of music that have a kind of minor tone, there's something quite peaceful about that. A lot of beautiful melodies or music is in the minor key, and it's not depressing. And then, but it's true that there is this sadness to samsara, to the existence, to the realm we're living in. But also, the realm we're living in, we experience joy. And mudita is a rising of joy at beauty, not in terms of a personality, getting what you want or getting your way with life, but just the joy of seeing the goodness in others. Like one feels like the dana today, the efforts everybody made to provide this excellent meal. When you think about that, the goodness behind that, the generosity, then the experience kind of rapture, mudita, kind of joyfulness, because that's the way it is. It comes not from from me getting the food I wanted. It is much more kind of like, the goodness behind this offering is reflected upon, and one feels this joyfulness that arises naturally.
The next question is, does the knowing depend on an object to arise?
Well, knowing is consciousness, and consciousness is what we're all experiencing now. And then, when we look at, we're conditioned to know objects. So we say, this is a cup, this is a bottle of water, and so we have, we know objects according to the conditioning we've received, the language that we're brought up with. But there's also knowing, not knowing. And this is, like knowing, not knowing is like this. So it's a knowing that isn't from knowing about things or from just conditions, conditioned things or formed things. It's intuitive knowing or ultimate knowing, universal wisdom. And this is the knowing is represented in that the Buddha represents, where modern education is knowing about things. So you go to universities and colleges or read books, and you know all about all kinds of things. So that's acquired knowledge. But knowing in this sense is direct knowing, just like pointing out right now, there's consciousness, you're conscious. And so, we're conscious without knowing we're conscious. We just assume we're conscious, but even though consciousness is so obviously what we are, we identify with the body, with what we look like, with the age of the body, with the race and so forth. And when we create we're always clinging and identifying with the things that are changing. That's the pathos of samsara. The sadness is that all that is mine, beloved and pleasing will become otherwise. And yet until we awaken to Dhamma, then we're always trying to find things that are going to change, that are going to inevitably disappoint us and die and not give us what we want for eternity. Yet where this blind seeking is always seeking for the next thing to grasp, to feel okay, to feel happy, to get what we want. So then this is called samsara vata, or the cycles of birth and death that we bind ourselves to. Then the Buddha teaching, wake up and see what you're doing. Be the knowing of this knowing that is like jnana dasana. It's not learned knowledge from scriptures or from teachers. It's universal discernment, wisdom that is available to human beings through this practice of this development, cultivation of mindfulness and wisdom. So I think that's enough for the time being. And then this is the last day, isn't it?
Last day of the retreat, yeah. So maybe give Luang Por 3 rounds of sadhu, just to end there.